The Fourth Wing series has undoubtedly gained a significant following, with readers hyping it to be the next big thing in fantasy, but for all the acclaim it's received, it's hard to ignore just how fundamentally weak the series is. From the lack of meaningful world building to shallow characterization, this story feels like a hollow shell of what it could have been. It's the kind of series that could be set in any generic setting, it would still feel uninspired. So here's why the series fails to live up to the hype. I'm Will, I'm the host of The Bald Book Geek. Like, sub, tell me what you think in the comments, membership, Patreon available, and I'm now on Substack. So let's look at the Fourth Wing series. World building is arguably the most critical part of any fantasy novel, but the Fourth Wing offers a disappointingly thin backdrop that fails to captivate or immerse. The world is a patchwork of tired fantasy tropes without depth or originality to make it feel distinct. The concept of dragon riding is recycled from countless other novels and books and short stories. Most notably Eragon. While being Star Wars with dragons is a far more compelling story with far better world building overall. And that's a weaker end of fantasy, so that says a lot. There's nothing in this version of dragon riding that offers a fresh perspective or creative take. It's simply a backdrop for a narrative rather than a living, breathing world that feels integrated into the story. The setting lacks cultural richness or any sense of history that makes it feel lived in. The details that could have elevated the world building are nowhere to be found, leaving us with this flat, one-note environment. There's no sense of discovery or wonder because there's nothing new here to discover. It's as if the author picked a generic fantasy setting from a template and never bothered to flesh it out. A bit of depth and complexity would have been good. Also, the magic system is a huge letdown. Rather than having well-defined rules or limitation, the magic feels like a plot device that exists to advance the story rather than a fundamental part of the world. The lack of imagination and detail robs this world of any sense of intrigue or excitement, leaving us with something that's hollow and forgettable. Characterization is where the Fourth Wing truly falls on its face. For a story that relies so heavily on development of its main character, the series fails to make her journey compelling in any meaningful way. She's a typical chosen one, but without the layers that would make her feel like a real multi-dimensional character. She's too perfect, too predictable. Her struggles are either minimal or resolved too easily. Readers are told she's special, but there's no explanation of why or how she earned that status. She lacks depth and nuance. Without those qualities, it's hard for readers to be emotionally invested in her journey, and I won't lie, when I was reading the series, I hoped she would just fall off the dragon. And then there's the love interest. The brooding, mysterious bad boy with a tragic past. It's so tired. It's archetypical at this point, and the Fourth Wing offers nothing new in this regard. He is exactly what you expect. A stoic, emotionally distant figure who hides his vulnerabilities behind a facade of toughness. The romantic relationship is rushed, forced, and relies too heavily on cliches. The chemistry between the two characters never feels genuine or earned. Instead, it's like an obituary of a romance novel that's been thrown into a fantasy setting because the genre demands it. The supporting characters aren't even better. They're barely fleshed out, and they often feel like they're only there to move the plot along or serve as a plot device. They're the writing equivalent of the rings from the Vampire Diaries. You're struggling to remember their names or care about their fates because they're given little to no development. The entire cast is one-dimensional and forgettable, which makes it difficult to invest in any of these emotional moments that the story tries to create. Writing is, of course, another fundamental element that can make or break a novel. In the case of The Fourth Wing, the writing is far from stellar. The poise is chunky and awkward, filled with repetitive phrases and terrible writing cliches that don't do the story any justice. The author's lack of originality and style really shows. Instead of immersing readers in the world of a story, it feels like a constant distraction. The dialogue, in particular, is a sore point. It's stiff, unnatural, and often jarringly modern. The characters speak in a way that is more fitting for a YA novel circa 2006 than a novel that's meant to be a high fantasy epic. Let's be real, it isn't, it's romantasy. Instead of characters' words flowing naturally and falling in love with the world they inhabit, the dialogue feels forced and artificial, often pulling readers out of the story. Instead of being evocative or poetic, the writer relies on one simple fact. Ultimately, poise that fails to capture the grandeur of the world or any of complexities of these characters that she's trying to point out, even though there are none. It's clear that the author had a story to tell, but doesn't seem to have the skill to make it worth telling. If you want the honest truth, on a pure writing level, this book is anything other. This book is just basic. And that's being nice. Surface level, recounting of events, and so on. The writing doesn't make you feel, it simply tells you what's happening. And without emotional resonance, the stakes feel even flatter. So perhaps, and this is the thing that really frustrated me with this book, The Fourth Wing is utterly lack of purpose behind its plot. The story unfolds without any real sense of tension or stakes because in the end, nothing truly matters. The protagonist's journey feels predictable, and despite the numerous air quotes challenges she faces, there's little doubt that everything will work out in the end. It's extremely convenient, it's extremely easy, and the conflict is shallow at best, and the resolutions are quick. The plot never takes a risk. One of the key problems here is that the series feels like it's going through the motions rather than telling a story of weight or significance. The events that unfold are generic at best, and the motivations behind the characters' actions are weak and underdeveloped. There's no sense of growth, there's no real internal or external conflict to drive the narrative forward in a meaningful way. Without a solid foundation to root the story in, it all comes off as a collection of scenes rather than a coherent, compelling plot. It's hard to care about the world's fate, the characters' futures, or even the protagonist's journey when everything feels just shallow and inconsequential. There's no real exploration of what's at stake or why we should be invested. The book just asks readers to accept everything at face value without depth to back it up, and it quickly becomes tiresome. The Fourth Wing has gained significant traction in the book community. It's very clear that much of the buzz surrounding it is fueled by hype rather than substance. Sure, the book ticks off the boxes that many fantasy fans enjoy. A spunky heroine, a dragon, magic, and romance, but it's done it's just basic and uninspired. The world building is non-existent, the characters are cookie cutter, the writing is lazy, and the plot is utterly forgettable and predictable. If the series was stripped of its marketing and popular buzz, it would be remembered just as another forgotten fantasy novel series that tried to capitalise on a genre trend rather than offering anything new or interesting. In the end, Fourth Wing is a mediocre series masquerading as something grander. It borrows heavily from better works, fails to execute its ideas, and doesn't deliver or live up to the premise it makes to its readers. If you're looking for a fantasy series with depth, compelling characters, and world building that make you feel like you're stepping into a different world, you're better off looking elsewhere. The hype may draw you in, but the series won't keep you engaged for long. Like I said, shallow, predictable, and boring. This is a story that could have been so much better, but ultimately just another forgettable entry in the oversaturated world of fantasy literature that we're currently living in. Like I said, go elsewhere, there are better books, better writers, and leave this one in the dust.